You know that feeling, just scrolling and scrolling, headlines flying past, and you just feel overwhelmed, lost in all the noise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to feel like you're drowning in information but not really understanding what's actually going on underneath.
Exactly, and that's why we're here. Welcome to the deep dive. We try to cut through that static, look at the sources you've shared, and find the patterns.
And today, we're diving into Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, a really vital book. We're looking at the lessons from, well, mostly 20th century history
Right.
about the threats to democracy and, maybe more importantly, how people have resisted tyranny. What can we learn for today?
Think of it like getting historical X-ray specs to see the bones of what's happening now. We'll follow Snyder's key themes, starting with one that really jumps out. Do not obey in advance.
Okay, so what does that actually mean? It's this concept Snyder calls anticipatory obedience.
Anticipatory obedience.
Now,
Phrase.
it's when people, maybe feeling uncertain or trying to fit in, start offering support or changing their behavior before they're even asked to by, a new regime or a powerful force.
They're trying to guess what's wanted.
Pretty much trying to get ahead of the curve, but in doing so, they can actually pave the way for more repression, make it easier.
Snyder gives some pretty sobering examples. Germany after 32, Czechoslovakia after 46.
Yeah. He points out it wasn't just top-down orders, it was also about how people voluntarily started, falling into line, adapting.
And the example of Austria in 1938, that was particularly stark.
Oh, absolutely. Snyder, and he draws on Hannah Arendt here, talks about how quickly many ordinary Austrians, not just Nazis, started participating, persecuting Jewish neighbors, stealing property.
Voluntary.
Yes, that's the chilling part. This anticipatory action showed the Nazi leadership just how much was possible, how much support they might get. Arendt noted the awful spike in suicides among Austrian Jews right after the invasion, alongside riots by their Gentile neighbors. It's a devastating picture of people aligning themselves with power almost instantly.
It's easy to think, oh, that was then. But Snyder connects it to something more universal, right?
Yeah.
The Milgram experiments.
Exactly. Stanley Milgram's work at Yale. This is where it gets really uncomfortable for all of us.
Because it wasn't about Nazis or a specific time?
No. It was in a lab setting. Ordinary people, asked by someone in a lab coat, were surprisingly willing to inflict what they thought were painful electric shocks on someone else.
Just because they were told to.
Just because someone in perceived authority told them to. It showed this deep-seated tendency towards obedience, even when it conflicts with personal conscience. Even without explicit orders for cruelty, the authority was enough.
Right, a huge percentage went all the way. Even hearing screams makes you really question things.
Yeah.
But then Snyder makes a contrast with the SS in 1941.
Yes, that's a crucial distinction. In the occupied Soviet Union, the SS didn't just wait for orders from Hitler on mass murder. They took the initiative.
They came up with the methods themselves.
They devised and implemented methods of mass killing, essentially anticipating or maybe even exceeding what they thought Hitler wanted. So, do not obey in advance isn't just about refusing a direct bad order.
It's about that internal nudge.
It's resisting that urge to preemptively align yourself, to act in ways you suspect might be desired, even if no one said it out loud. That proactive compliance, it's like fuel for tyranny.
Wow. Okay, that reframes things. Let's move to the next lesson. Defend institutions. This feels foundational.
It absolutely is. Institutions, courts, the press, election systems, they're the guardrails, right? They're meant to protect decency, protect rights. But Snyder stresses they aren't, self-healing.
They need us to actively participate.
Exactly. They only work if we make them ours, if we actively defend their principles.
And the danger is complacency, assuming they can't be broken by people who rise up through them.
Right. Even if those people openly say they want to tear things down, like the Bolsheviks did, we can't assume institutions will automatically protect themselves.
He talks about the Nazi concept of Gleichschaltung.
Yes, Gleichschaltung. It means coordination or Nazification. It wasn't always about outright destruction. Often it was about hollowing out institutions from the inside.
Keeping the shell, but changing the substance.
Precisely. Keeping the courts, the parliament, but making sure they served the party. It created this veneer of normality while the core was being corrupted.
And he describes how fast it happened in Germany. By late 33, basically a one-party state. Elections without opposition.
Referendums just to confirm the new reality. And he notes the tragic detail that some German Jews actually voted the way the Nazis wanted in those early votes, hoping.
Hoping for protection.
Hoping that showing loyalty might somehow shield them. It's a stark example of how hope can be misplaced when the fundamental rules are being rewritten.
So bringing this to today, Snyder connects this to the U.S. system, checks and balances.
He does. He raises concerns about, for instance, the influence of money in politics, campaign finance laws, potentially equating money with speech, which can distort things.
Oligarchy, he mentions.
Right. And he also points to situations where, one party gains control across different branches and levels of government and might push policies that maybe don't have broad popular support. This creates a tension with democracy.
So the question for us is, how do we keep institutions robust and responsive?
Exactly. How do we actively defend them, make sure they serve the public good, not just concentrated power? It requires constant vigilance.
Okay, that's crucial. Let's shift to the next point. Take responsibility for the face of the world. This feels very immediate, very daily.
It really is. Snyder's point here is that the symbols we see, the language we hear, the things we tolerate in public space, they aren't neutral. They shape tomorrow's reality.
So, seeing a swastika.
Don't just walk past, notice it. Challenge it, remove it, make it clear it's unacceptable. Because tolerating those symbols normalizes the hate they represent.
And he says life itself is political. Our actions, even small ones, or our inactions.
They all have political weight. They contribute to the overall climate.
He uses some really powerful and frankly horrifying examples. The Soviet Union and the kulaks.
Yeah, the dehumanization campaign against prosperous peasants in the early 30s, propaganda consistently portrayed them as greedy pigs. The symbolic shift, changing the face of this group,
Made the violence possible.
it paved the way for dispossession, exile, and the engineered famine that killed millions in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Russia, horrific conditions, even cannibalism. Words and images have consequences.
And then the Nazi boycott of Jewish shops in 1933.
Right. Maybe not everyone joined in immediately, but the act of marking businesses Jewish here, Aryan there, it subtly changed how people thought about everyday economics.
Made Jewish businesses targets.
Exactly. They became separate, vulnerable, eventually leading to theft and disappearance. Snyder argues that even just watching this happen, accepting the labels, was a compromise, a step towards accepting a Germany without Jews.
Passivity is complicity.
Yeah.
And then there's Havel's greengrocer.
Vaclav Havel's brilliant parable. The greengrocer puts up the sign, "Workers of the world, unite." Not because he believes it, probably doesn't even think about it.
He just does it to avoid trouble.
Exactly. But when everyone does these little acts of conformity just to get by, the entire public sphere becomes saturated with this inauthentic loyalty. It props up the regime, makes real dissent seem impossible.
So taking responsibility means being conscious of the symbols, the language, the norms we accept.
Yes, because they literally build the world we live in.
Okay, powerful stuff. Let's move to lesson 5. Remember professional ethics. This feels very relevant today.
Hugely relevant. Snyder's argument is that when political leaders disregard ethics, the responsibility falls even more heavily on professionals, lawyers, doctors, civil servants, judges, business people, to uphold their own ethical codes.
Because authoritarians need them.
They can't implement their plans without cooperation. They need lawyers to twist the law, doctors to bypass consent, bureaucrats to process the paperwork, businessmen to exploit labor.
He gives some chilling examples. Hitler's lawyer, Hans Frank.
Yeah, justifying law as serving the race while overseeing occupied Poland. Arthur Seyss in court, another lawyer facilitating the Austrian annexation, the Dutch occupation, and the fact that lawyers were disproportionately represented among Einsatzgruppen commanders.
The death squads. That's horrifying.
It is. And doctors conducting experiments in camps, businesses using slave labor, civil servants managing the logistics of genocide, the list goes on.
Snyder's point is if they had refused, if they'd stuck to their ethics.
If lawyers insisted on trials, doctors on consent, if they refused to sign off on murder or enable slavery, it would have been a massive obstacle. Maybe not stopped everything, but significantly hampered the regime's ability to commit atrocities on that scale.
So professional ethics aren't just abstract rules.
They're a form of power, a potential source of collective resistance, especially when you're told it's an emergency or just follow orders. That's when ethics matter most.
Okay, that's a serious call to responsibility. Let's look at the next one. Be wary of paramilitaries. This feels, unfortunately, timely in some places.
It does. Snyder issues a clear warning. When you see armed groups outside the regular police or military starting to wear uniforms, marching with symbols of a leader.
And especially if they seem to mix with official forces.
Exactly. Or operate with their tolerance. That's a critical danger sign.
Because democracy relies on the state having a monopoly on violence.
Generally, yes. For elections, courts, law enforcement to function properly, the state needs to control the legitimate use of force. When non-state groups start wielding violence,
It undermines everything.
it does. And those who want to break democracy often cultivate these groups, party militias, leaders' bodyguards, sometimes presented as spontaneous movements, but often funded and directed.
He mentions historical groups like the Iron Guard in Romania, Arrow Cross in Hungary.
Using intimidation and violence against opponents, and, of course, the Nazi stormtroopers, the SA.
Started as party security, then became much more.
Became a force for terror, creating fear, attacking opponents, establishing lawless zones like the early concentration camps. The SS took that even further, extending that lawlessness across occupied Europe. It's a pattern. Paramilitaries start outside the law, then act above it, then ultimately can destroy it.
He also connects this to the U.S. context, mentioning private mercenaries, private prisons.
Right, the privatization of violence. But he also highlights something relatively new and concerning in the U.S. context. A presidential candidate with a personal security force that physically clashed with protesters at rallies.
And the candidate encouraging the crowd to remove protesters.
Yes, actively encouraging violence, saying things like he'd like to punch them in the face, finding it fun. This rhetoric, this normalization of mob behavior at political events, is a serious departure.
And the danger is that this attitude could spread.
The danger, Snyder warns, is if the emotions and ideology of those rallies, the exclusion, the aggression, start to seep into the training and mindset of actual police and military. If these forces become penetrated or transformed by that paramilitary spirit.
When the lines blur.
When those lines blur, the rule of law is in real trouble.
This flows right into the next point, which revisits professional ethics, but specifically for those who are armed. Be reflective if you must be armed.
Yes, this is directed squarely at police, soldiers, anyone in public service who carries a weapon. Snyder acknowledges their role but points to history. Police and soldiers have been ordered to do terrible, irregular things.
So they need to be ready to refuse.
They need the moral framework and the courage to say no to unlawful or unethical orders.
He talks about the typical authoritarian setup, riot police, secret police.
Right, the visible fist and the hidden dagger. But he stresses, and this is important, these groups, like the NKVD or the SS, didn't act alone.
They needed help.
They relied on regular police, sometimes regular soldiers, for the sheer scale of operations. Think of the Soviet Great Terror, nearly 700,000 executions.
Couldn't be done by just a few NKVD agents?
No, it needed local police, officials signing warrants, bureaucrats managing lists, even if a smaller group pulled the triggers.
And the Holocaust didn't start in Auschwitz.
It started largely with mass shootings in Eastern Europe,
Ah.
often carried out by ordinary German police units, the Ordnungspolizei.
Regular cops.
Regular cops. Snyder cites research showing they actually killed more Jews than the Einsatzgruppen, often with little special training driven by orders, peer pressure, fear of seeming weak, and crucially,
Refusing wasn't usually punished harshly.
refusing murder orders rarely led to severe consequences, which tells you something.
That it wasn't just fanatics.
Some were certainly fanatics, but many were conformists, people just going along. Without them, the scale of the horror would have been impossible.
It really puts the onus on individual conscience, especially for those with state power.
Absolutely. Reflection and the courage to refuse are vital checks.
Okay, let's turn to Lesson 8. Stand out. This sounds like a call for nonconformity.
It is precisely that. Snyder argues freedom depends on individuals being willing to break the mold, to dissent, even when it feels strange or isolates you. He uses Rosa Parks as a prime example. Her quiet defiance shattered a norm.
He pushes back against the idea that resistance was widespread in the 30s.
Yeah, he contrasts the post-war myths with the reality that at the time, accommodation, appeasement, even admiration for Hitler were common, including among influential people in the U.S., like Lindbergh.
So the heroes we remember now.
Were often seen as outliers, maybe even crazy in their own time, because they didn't go along.
He then gives that grim timeline. Italy fascist by 22, democracies falling across Europe, Austria annexed without a fight, Czechoslovakia carved up with Allied agreement.
The Soviet-Nazi pact, it looks like almost total collapse.
But then, moments of standing out. Poland fighting back.
Poland's decision to fight, despite the odds, was crucial. It forced Britain and France to declare war. And then, after France fell in 1940, Churchill.
Refusing to surrender.
His absolute refusal, his speeches rallying the nation, the RAF holding off the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, pilots from Britain, Poland, elsewhere. Snyder argues this stand forced Hitler to change plans, invade the Soviet Union, creating the two-front war that ultimately led to his defeat without that defiance in 1940.
History could have been very different.
Very different. And he reminds us Britain was only in the war because Poland chose to fight first.
He also tells a more personal story. Teresa Prekarowa in Warsaw.
Yes, a powerful example of individual courage. Warsaw, 1940, under brutal occupation. Her family lost everything, her father arrested. But instead of just surviving, she actively helped Jewish people in the ghetto.
At huge personal risk.
Smuggling food, medicine, helping a family escape. At a time when many were quietly cutting ties with Jewish friends, she just did what she felt needed doing. She stood out, later became a Holocaust historian.
An incredible story.
Okay,
Lesson 9. Be kind to our language. How does language fit into resisting tyranny?
Snyder sees language as fundamental to thought. He advises us to avoid just repeating cliches, to think for ourselves, speak in our own words, and importantly, to read books.
As an antidote
To the often superficial, manipulated language of the internet and some media, books offer depth, nuance.
He mentions Victor Klemperer again.
Klemperer's analysis of how the Nazis systematically poisoned the German language, redefining words like people, encounter, defamation to serve their ideology, to eliminate legitimate opposition.
And Snyder sees echoes today.
He sees politicians feeding sound bites and cliches, which get repeated, even by critics. He notes how the speed of TV news can hinder deep thinking.
He also references dystopian novels, Fahrenheit 451, 1984.
Their warnings about screen dominance, suppressing books, shrinking vocabulary, all things that limit our ability to think critically.
So his practical advice is...
Get screens out of the bedroom, surround yourself with books, develop your own mental landscape, don't just rely on the flickering screen. He even lists key thinkers. Orwell, Arndt, Havel to engage with.
Defending language is defending thought. Okay, lesson 10. Believe in truth. Seems obvious, but maybe it isn't.
Snyder argues it's crucial. To believe in truth is to have a basis for criticizing power. If there's no objective truth and everything is just perspective or spectacle.
Then power does what it wants.
Exactly. And money talks loudest. He says we surrender to tyranny when we get up on the distinction between what we want to be true and what is true. It dissolves individual responsibility and the basis for any rational system.
He uses Klemperer's framework again on how truth dies.
Yes, 4 modes. 1, open hostility to facts, just lying. 2, shamanistic incantation, repeating lies endlessly until they sound plausible.
Like slogans or nicknames.
Right. 3, magical thinking, openly embracing contradictions, promising impossible things. And 4, amnesia, just forgetting or ignoring uncomfortable truths.
He connects post-truth to pre-fascism.
He does. He points out how fascist movements historically disdained everyday facts, loved myths and slogans, used new media, radio then, internet now, to stir emotions before reason could catch up, leading people to confuse faith in a leader with belief in truth itself.
A very sharp analysis of information manipulation, which leads to lesson 11, investigate.
The active response. If we believe in truth, we have to seek it out. Don't just consume passively. Dig deeper. Read long articles. Support investigative journalism.
Be critical of online sources.
Learn about propaganda. Recognize bots and trolls. Take responsibility for what you share.
He pushes back against cynicism about truth.
Strongly. He says discerning facts makes us individuals. Trusting shared facts makes a society. Investigators are builders. Leaders who attack them are potential destroyers.
He discusses the attacks on media, the preference for online channels.
Contrasting Hannah Arendt's earlier optimism about facts winning out with the 2016 election, where online narrative seemed incredibly powerful, maybe more than face-to-face campaigning.
He also asks why we pay for services but expect news for free.
Right. How can we make sound political judgments based on zero investment in reliable information?
But he also sees the internet's potential.
Huge potential to share facts, unlike the past where people like Klemperer or Havel faced censorship, risked everything to circulate truth in secret, like samizdat. He quotes Havel. If the main pillar of the system is living a lie, the fundamental threat to it is living in truth.
So our responsibility now is verification, sharing carefully.
Yes. Follow trusted reporters, check sources, don't amplify disinformation. Protect the information space.
Okay, lesson 12. Make eye contact and small talk.
Yeah.
Seems small.
Deceptively simple, maybe? But Snyder argues totalitarianism works by isolating people, breaking down social trust, atomization.
So small talk pushes back.
These simple acts of connection, acknowledging people you see every day, a brief chat, they reinforce the social fabric. They resist that isolation. They remind us we're part of a community.
A micro-resistance. Okay. 13. Practice corporeal politics. Get physical.
Get off the couch, basically. Snyder says power often wants our bodies passive, our energy spent online. He urges people to get outside.
Go places. Meet people.
Go to unfamiliar places, meet different kinds of people, build new connections, and yes, march together, protest.
Real-world action.
Successful resistance usually involved diverse groups finding common ground, often outside their usual circles. Online organizing is useful, but things need to happen in the streets, in physical spaces to have real impact.
He gives the example of solidarity in Poland.
Yes, a successful mass movement against communism. Crucially, it was a broad coalition. Workers, intellectuals, the church, secular groups who learned from past divisions and built trust across society. Corporeal politics in action.
So real-world engagement is key. 14. Establish a private life. This seems harder than ever.
It is. Snyder warns that tyrants look for leverage, for ways to control people through their vulnerabilities. He cites Arndt again. Totalitarianism aims to erase the line between private and public life.
Our freedom depends on that line.
On controlling what's known about us and when. He argues that accepting violations of privacy, like the hacking and leaking of emails in 2016, moves us towards that totalitarian direction.
Because it exposes people, allows manipulation.
It destroys the foundation of rights. Words taken out of context become weapons. It allows humiliation, disruption, distraction. He criticizes media for sometimes following these leaks as news, rather than focusing on the violation itself.
Aren't warned about an appetite for secrets being dangerous.
Yes, because it shifts focus to conspiracy, makes the act of revelation the story, even if the content is trivial. When we get drawn into irrelevant private matters, timed by those who want to manipulate us,
we participate in dismantling our own system.
we risk becoming part of what Arndt called the mob. Snyder advises both individual vigilance about security and supporting groups that defend privacy rights.
Protecting the private sphere is protecting democracy. Okay. 15. Contribute to good causes.
A straightforward but important one. Tyranny thrives on passivity. Supporting causes you believe in, organizations working for a better world, is an active pushback.
It affirms positive values.
It's an investment in the world you want, countering apathy and cynicism.
16. Learn from peers in other countries. Look beyond our borders.
Absolutely. Snyder stresses that the challenges facing the U.S. are often part of global trends. We won't find solutions alone. Maintain friendships abroad, build new ones.
Get a passport.
He literally says that. Ensure you and your family have passports. He points out how East Europeans often understood the 2016 U.S. election dynamics better than many Americans because they'd seen similar patterns.
Like with cyber warfare and fake news.
Ukrainians, he notes, reacted much faster and more effectively to Russian disinformation campaigns because they'd been targeted for years. They recognized the playbook. He contrasts Ukraine's rapid debunking of fake stories with how long some falsehoods circulated in the U.S.
History moving from east to west, he suggests.
It seems that way sometimes. He argues low U.S. passport ownership is a problem, limiting understanding and engagement with how others handle similar threats. A passport isn't surrender, it's a tool for learning and connection.
Broadening perspective is crucial. 17. Listen for dangerous words. Back to language.
Be alert to terms like extremism, terrorism, and especially emergency and exception. And watch out for cynical uses of patriotic language.
He mentions Carl Schmitt again.
Schmitt's theory of how fascists use the idea of the exception to dismantle rules. Create a sense of permanent crisis so people trade freedom for supposed safety.
The terrorism excuse.
Politicians exploiting fear of terrorism to grab power. Snyder insists there's no necessary trade-off between freedom and safety. Often those demanding you give up freedom want to deny you both. Real safety and freedom often go together.
And extremism.
A vague term tyrants use to label anyone who opposes them. Dissidents against fascism or communism were called extremists. Modern authoritarians use extremism laws to crush dissent. It means nothing precise except not us.
So listen critically to the framing. 18. Be calm when the unthinkable arrives. Prepare for shocks.
Modern tyranny uses terror management. Exploiting attacks, real, maybe questionable, sometimes fake, to consolidate power. Don't fall for it.
The Reichstag fire being the classic example.
The archetype. A spectacular event blamed on enemies, used immediately by Hitler to suspend rights, declare emergency, push through the Enabling Act, rule by decree, a 12-year emergency.
And modern authoritarians use this too.
He points to Putin's rise after the 1999 apartment bombings, using the subsequent Chechen War to boost popularity, using later crises like the Moscow theater siege or Beslan school attack to centralize power further.
Russia using it abroad too.
In Ukraine, trying to destabilize Europe with disinformation, fake terror plots in Germany. It's a tactic.
So when leaders talk about fighting terror with regimes like Russia,
Snyder warns they might be proposing joining in on terror management. The lesson. Fear and grief are natural after an attack, but they must not become excuses to dismantle our own institutions. Madison warned about tyranny arising in emergencies. Aren't realized after the Reichstag fire, you can't be a bystander.
stay calm, defend principles. Okay, 19, be a patriot. How does Snyder define this?
Interestingly, he largely defines it by what it's not. He lists things like dodging military service while mocking heroes, discriminating against soldiers, tax evasion, using public money for private gain, admiring dictators, inviting foreign election interference, using foreign propaganda.
So actions that undermine democratic values and national interest.
Exactly. True patriotism, he implies, is about loyalty to democratic ideals and institutions, not blind loyalty to a leader, especially one flirting with authoritarianism or foreign adversaries.
Upholding values over personality. Okay, the final lesson, 20. Be as courageous as you can.
The powerful closing. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. He evokes Hamlet, the time is out of joint, suggesting our time is similarly disordered, forgetful of history.
He critiques the politics of inevitability.
The post-Cold War belief that liberal democracy was the inevitable endpoint. He says this lowered our defenses, made us complacent, unable to imagine things going backward. A self-induced intellectual coma.
Leading to stale politics. Defend the status quo or just say no.
Limited critique. Even terms like disruption often just assume the basic system remains, like a streaker at a game doesn't change the rules.
And the alternative he warns against.
Yeah.
Politics of eternity.
This is looking backward, obsessing over a mythic, often victimized past, always blaming outsiders. National populists, he says, are eternity politicians, often drawn to the 1930s.
He gives examples. Brexit, French National Front.
Invoking imaginary pasts. He notes the American president using America First, an isolationist pre-WWII slogan. His advisor talking about the exciting 1930s, questioning, make America great again. Which past are we talking about?
This focus on a mythic past prevents fixing the present.
Exactly. It becomes about good versus evil, not solutions. A permanent crisis mindset that blocks reform.
So inevitability is a coma, eternity is hypnosis.
And the danger is slipping from one to the other. If the shock to inevitability leads us down the path of least resistance into the cyclical myth of eternity, we risk ending up in a very dark place, a confused, cynical fascist oligarchy.
Wow. So the call for courage is a call to break free from both illusions.
It's a call to wake up, to face history, face the present, and act with courage to defend freedom. It's not just idealism. It's presented as a practical necessity.
Well, that's our deep dive into Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny. We've walked through these 20 lessons, trying to pull out the core warnings and, well, the potential paths for resistance relevant today.
Yeah, the aim was really to take this incredibly important source material you provided and distill its essence, hopefully providing some clarity and some tools for thinking about our current moment.
We hope it gives you that historical lens, that framework for understanding.
And maybe leaves you with a question to ponder. Snyder describes those two modes of thinking, the comfortable politics of inevitability and the seductive politics of eternity.
Right, the coma and the hypnosis.
Which one, if any, do you find yourself drifting towards? And knowing that, what's one small conscious act you can take? Maybe remembering professional ethics, maybe making eye contact, maybe investigating a story more deeply to choose vigilance and courage instead.